Cool. And I will now hand it on over.
Hi, yeah. So as David said, I'm Clinton Bradford. I'm a mathematician working at EBSCO as a senior data pipeline engineer, which basically I manage infrastructure and automations for the moving of large quantities of data into and out of Folio, um, supporting the work that that the data migration team, which includes Brooks, does, and some other projects. Um, but this topic came up out of discussions in this Python4Lib group a while ago when PySimple GUI went through its whole kerfuffle. We were talking about what should we do for UIs, and there wasn't a lot of discussion about the absolute dominant way to do user interfaces in Python, which is to say, just do them in HTML and interface with Python through an API. So I wanted to go over the very basics of that process, define the terms, and then walk everyone through an example project that will demonstrate how you can use remote procedure calls to run local Python in a local script, any local Python you want, using a web page that's hosted locally as your interface. So we're going to go through as much of this as we get through. I want to make sure we take it slow and that everyone can feel free to ask questions and we can hopefully all feel comfortable with this process. If we just hit the first couple points and end up that's all we do, I'm perfectly happy with that. I want to get us to the point where we can run APIs. But if we have more time, we can talk about starting to make these interfaces more interactive or more pretty, documenting them in standardized ways. There's an endless rabbit hole you can go down in terms of API development and web development that is worth knowing about if you're going to try this. But if we just hit the core, feel free to slow me down as much as we need. If you have a question, other people almost certainly have the question. So we're going to start by just trying to understand all of these acronyms. We threw out a lot of acronyms just in the title of this: API, RPC, REST, HTML. Um, then we're going to move on to a live example of setting up a Flask RPC API, just showing how we can run local Python, and then develop a HTML interface on top of that. And then if we have time, move on to the other content. Right. So this is the last slide before we jump into the project. I just wanted to go through the definitions. RPC stands for Remote Procedure Call. It's the philosophy on which basically the entire um, server client model works in almost every instance these days. All that means is that you have a browser that sends a message over the internet or over just the network on your computer itself to a server. And then that server runs a function based on that message, like a normal Python function in this case, and then sends the result back to the browser. So it's a remote in that it's not in the browser procedure and that it's just a function call. Then we're going to work with a REST API today. That's a term that gets somewhat overused, and there's a lot of contention about what it means. It stands for representational state transfer. In its purest form, a REST API means a system where the client is doing as little of the logic as possible, and whenever it needs to change state, it does that by requesting a new state, a new web page in this case, from the server. So it requests a whole new block of content and it needs to change state, gets a block of content back. It doesn't interact through thinner APIs. It's asking for a whole chunk of HTML. API, now I've said that a couple of times, is just application programming interface. It's essentially the concept of defining a set of operations that someone can perform through RPC or any other method. programming languages themselves are in fact APIs to lower level code. It's a set of interfaces, so that would represent the functions that we're writing that can be called. And then HTML is what we're going to use to write the front end, because I don't know if anyone else here, well, I know several other people here have some experience trying to write front ends into Kinter or any of the other options, but you're not going to be able to write that in just Python, and HTML is the dominant language for writing interfaces these days that we can use in this. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and hypertext is going to be the key point here. We can do almost all the interaction you would ever need through the hypertext part of the hypertext, which refers to hyperlinks, and then also forms. Are there any questions about these definitions? I know I went through them a bit quickly, but they'll make a bit more sense as we come into demonstration.
No questions I see. I'll take a look through the chat too. And keep an eye on that for you.
So here I've opened a fairly empty project in VS Code. If you, oh yeah, Eric, I see a hand up. Oh, is it too small still? I can't hear you if you're talking a bit.
I don't see your screen. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, it says I'm sharing my screen.
Do you all see a screen too?
I'm able to see it.
Oh, I'm doing something wrong. My bad.
Zoom has a new feature. Sometimes there's a button in the top bar. It'll say Clifton Bradford screen. See if you see that. Click on it.
Oh, I do. Oh, okay. I see code now. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. So this is a completely blank project. The only things that I have in this are some example data. So in this case, I'm going to use an example from my mathematical career where we wanted to transform static exercises into dynamic randomized exercises. So I want to go through all of these files. In the real world, I had about 10,000 of them, so automations made a lot of sense. But here I have just two examples. These files of classic word problems that you'll remember and maybe resent from high school or college. But I need to parameterize them by replacing all of these numbers with formulas and random values. So to do that, I could write a script that goes through and uses, say, regular expressions to identify all these numbers, and it could prompt me at each point. That could get slow very quickly and would be difficult to see. So I'm going to try to make a more dynamic user interface for this. So I've installed Flask in a virtual environment. There was a talk a couple months ago about setting up a virtual environment. If you want to follow along, that's all you'll need to get started. And if you are really interested in trying this soon, I'd recommend following along. All right, so to make a Flask project, we simply make a new folder for our app. Then we can make a new file in the app. init.py, which is just the name for the file that's going to run when this directory is going to run. We can import Flask. Create an Flask app. And then we're going to define our functions. We're going to go def hello world. Just return hello world, the simplest function we all started Python with. And then here's where we're going to link it to a API so we can do these procedure calls. We're just going to do app.route. And then a path. So now I'm going to start Flask with the debug flag. And what the debug flag here does is that it lets us auto restart. So now it tells us this server is running on 127.0.0.1 means this machine. It's a standard term for this machine. You may also see localhost colon 5000. So I'm gonna quickly open that in Firefox here. And we can see that we've already done our first remote procedure call. We've taken the browser and we've made a call to slash just means the basic return page. We've made a call and we've run this function and we've got back the result of this function. And there's a lot that can be said for limiting what you're allowed to do, what state you're allowed to manage. But with Flask and with many of these simple web or simple API frameworks, you can put literally any Python here. If you have a script you want to run, you can trigger almost anything with one of these remote procedure calls. All right. So this is going to render in HTML, so we can start marking it up in HTML. So we want to return an HTML document, which is going to get a little wordy. We can do multi-line string, duct tape HTML, HTML, body, header. There's going to be a lot of tags here that I'm going to not fully explain. There are probably billions of resources on HTML, but it is famously full of tags. So here we've got the doc type, the HTML, body, H1 means header, hello world. And so now we've styled this to be big and bold. All right. But this is powering up our Python, so we're going to move it into a template, which is where we're going to get into some of the separation of concerns. So in our app here, in the app directory, we're going to make a new directory, templates. And in the new directory, we're going to make a new file, index.html, which is the term for typically the root of a product. We can take all this HTML we wrote, we can just put it in a template. Now we can get all this pretty formatting. And then we can tell Flask, which automatically knows templates are in the templates directory. We can import render template. And we can return render template and then the name of that template file.
Hadn't saved the template yet.
Oh, I haven't saved the template yet. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Chris. So now we've rendered this template and we can put, again, whatever we want into one of these templates. But the thing that makes these dynamic and interactive is that we can put hyperlinks into these templates. So I'm going to make another route. I can just copy. I'm going to name this route form. I'm going to need to make it a new template as well. I'm going to go over here and make a second template for that. So in the form, I'm going to put something else. And in the index, I'm going to put a link. So I'm going to say A href equals. And then I'm going to start using a templated parameter here. So these templates are called Jinja templates, and they let you put Python code, a limited amount of Python code, inside a script. So here's a URL4 as a function from Flask, and then I can say URL for one of these other paths. And now with that A tag, I now have a link. And if I click that link, I go to another page. Now we've linked these together with hypertext. And this is going to be the basic building block for all the interactivity we need. So on this form page, we can start constructing an actual interface for interacting with the website. We're going to do that through a form object in HTML. Forms are consisted of several inputs. So we're going to do form type equals text. And we can say name equals name. And we could give it a default value if we wanted. And then a form will, a standard HTML form will also have a closing input type equals submit that sends the form. So now if we do this, we have a form here where we can type. And then we can click the submit, and you'll see that by default, it takes you to the same page, but puts the values up there. But we want to process this information. So we're going to create a third route to receive this information in. So our third route, I'm going to go back over here. Our third route is going to be called submit. And because they're going to send us, or we're going to receive data on this, we're going to call this a method. We're going to use this method post, which is an HTML, or sorry, it's an HTTP method that means you're receiving data and doing an action with it. So we're going to receive this.
Oh,
Sorry,
just going to mention a comment. Boy, this takes me back to the early 2000 Cold Fusion days.
Yeah, there are modern techniques for not having to write out all of this HTML and for building UIs, but this is the simplest way you're going to get it, despite how ugly all of these HTML, all HTML is. All right. And then in the submit form, we're going to receive it as this request.form. The request is just another thing we have to import from Flask. So data equals request.form. And in this case, I'm just going to return the data raw. So now we're going to go back to this. We're going to do form. And then we're going to tell it to send it to a different page. And that's with the form action equals, and then another templated parameter, URL4, submit. And then method equals post, because we said we wanted to post. So now we're going to go back over here. We've got our form. We're going to refresh it real quick. And now we've sent this and we've received back name equals name, and then what we typed in as words as a JSON object. So we got that as a Python dictionary received into our function of everything we typed into the browser. That was passed into the function we ran through this remove procedure call as a dictionary. And then we were able to return a JSON object back that we can inspect in the browser or consume in another application. Is this making a lot of sense, people? I think so. I think I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could
I
see
see
the.
Susan.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. I see Susan in chat mentioned Node.js expressified, and that's a great thing to pick up on. If you really wanted to dig deep into this, that's a great next thing to look into for building a more dynamic user interface down the line. Node is, well, Express is a framework for building out these APIs in JavaScript. It's very similar to this, but using JavaScript for the back end and the front end can give you some advantages. This is Python4Lib, so we're going to do this in Python for now. But it's worth remembering that there are other options in the world than Python, although not so easy ones for everything. There's some things that are really only doable in Python. Anyway, all right. So now we've got the basic components of our RPC web app. We've got the ability to run a function. We've got the ability to provide inputs to that function and to process the result. So now we can go back to our initial problem, which was we want to take these files that contain this information, and we want to make do some processing on these files. So to start off with, let's take a list of these files and provide it to the client. So in this hello world template, which is our introductory landing place, we're going to add a bit more complicated Python. We are going to, import OS. And while I'm at it, I'll also get a path tool. We're going to say, all right, I want to list out all these files. I'm just going to go os.lister. And then I'm going to list the data directory in which I've stored these files. And then I'm going to say, okay, this is a variable files that's just a list. And then I'm going to pass that into the template. And so now I can go over to my template, and I can start using that list to make a more dynamic interactive web page. So I'm going to start off by doing a loop over the list so I can present multiple content. For that, I'm going to put a wrapping HTML list container around it. And then I'm going to use a template looping operator from Jinja for file in files. So I'm going to, sorry, I had to do that. All right, so anchor reference, and we're going to send this to URL for the form endpoint, and then we're going to write down the file name. All right. And then we're gonna, excuse me, this is getting a bit crowded with how Zoom doing. Make sure we end the for at the appropriate point. So right below the closing list. All right, so now if I go back to that home landing page, excuse me. My auto prompter put in an extra curly brace, but it warned me about it. So now we're going back, go back here, make sure we save that. All right, so we've got the loop operator in this list container. We've got this anchor tag, which provides that hyperlink, and then the URL for, which tells it the destination. And then we have this templated parameter inside the loop, which lets it write out different things. And now let's say that I want to have it without the .txt here. It's relatively difficult to do those manipulations in the template, but we can always do manipulations on this data before we pass it. So I can, for example, go to Files and do path f.stem for f in files, and use the path.lib to extract that information. Now I've got those, it's just this plain. All right, that still takes me to the generic form. So I'm going to use a URL parameter to create a web page that is targeted to each individual file. So parameters can, oh, sorry. Is there a
Quick question from the chat. Sorry if I missed this, but what is the origin of the, or source of the curly brace %for_file in files code? Is that from one of the Python libraries?
So that is a Jinja template parameter. It's from the broader Flask library collection that can only be used in those HTML template files. Thank you, Brooks.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. So we can also, so we can make links that go to specific pages and pass information between them with URL parameters. In this case, we can just put open arrow and then a variable name, close arrow, and then just put that same variable name as an argument to the function. And all of a sudden we have this variable that we can pass through. So if I save this and restart, now if I look, oh, sorry, we need to set also URL for form and then tell it the templated parameter in the URL for as well. So now it'll construct the URL for form with that parameter. So if I click through, now we're going to /form/train. And if I add to the form template, I can now go over to the form template. I can go form action, method post, or so h1 form, file, and then make sure also that I'm passing it in as a templatable parameter. So now I can create these special destinations. All right. And now we can build out dynamic user interfaces from this as well. So the first thing that we can do is we can fetch the content of the file. So if we can first check whether that file even exists. So here we're checking if the file does not exist, then we can return a 404 result. There we go. That's what sorry. We can return a 404 result. So if I can ask for form blah blah, then I can say file not found and return a 404, which is an error code that's passed downstream to other APIs to say that it got an error, it wasn't found. We can short circuit that, and then if not, we can say with open we can read in the file and we can pass that into the template and render that in the template. We're going to go back to our form template here. And now we've got a templated parameter text that we can put in place in here. I'm going to use one of my absolute favorite HTML tags, pre, which means render a thing as it was formatted. Don't smush it up. They're all saved. Oh, sorry, text. All right. And so now we've rendered the initial text of that file in the browser, read out by the parameter that we provided. And we can start doing processing to that as well. So we want to find all of the numbers in this and present an option to replace them with a function or parameter. So we can use the regular expressions library to quickly find numbers. So I'm just going to do import re. And sorry. Numbers equals re.findAll. In this case, I'm going to be confident that I'm just looking for whole integers. So I'm just going to say any string of contiguous digits, find that for me. And so that's going to train a variable of numbers in the process file. I can just take the numbers. And we can see that this numbers is a list of strings. So we can do another loop on it. In this case, I'm going to construct a table. Yeah. And I'm just going to grab a table over here since I am running a bit over. And so now with this simple bit of table code and one of these for loops, for each number up here, I can construct a collection of inputs and outputs. So I can say, all right, so for number 6, I can give it a variable name, start time, a variable formula, randint, say, to 8. I can start writing down all of this information that I want to record. And now, when I click submit, we can see that that's coming through in the JSON for all of this information. And so then lastly, I can take this and I can save it out to where I need to save it. Because again, this is being passed to a Python function. So if I want to save this forever, I can pass it out to a destination. So to do that, I want to get a destination. And so that's one of the last important tools in this toolbox here. Is actually going to be a hidden input. So if I do input type equals hidden, then I can pass it any value I want, and that value will come through as one of these form parameters on the outside. So in this case, I'm going to tell it I want that file name as the parameter that's passed through. And I'm going to go back over to my init.py. So now that data is going to be in the request.form. And so I'm going to say with open, and then we'll say output data file.txt w as f. And then I can write out to the file. So I'm going to do f.write. And I'm going to use one of my other favorite libraries, JSON, to dump that dictionary out to a string. So I'm going to json.dump request.form. I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it an indent of 2, just because I like indenting 2. And I'm going to make sure I import JSON to the top. Now I've got everything I need in order to take this form input that I've done through this web interface. So again, I have this form, and I can put other words. Click submit. Sorry. Click. Oh, and I'm going to create, excuse me, that was just a, and I'm going to create the out directory so that I can create files in it. Create the out directory. So now it returns this, and if I look in that new out directory, I've written out train.txt. So I've built this simple user interface that lets me tag flagged variables from a file and then store them in a JSON document that I can consume for later processing in more automated ways. That's the very basics of building a simple user interface to do remote procedure calls in Python with forms and HTML parameters. That's really what I wanted to show could be accomplished relatively simply with really robust standardized tools. At that point, I'm just going to move to questions because I think we're pretty much out of time on presentation. Move to discussion. Are there any questions about this?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask. Or if you want, you can type them up into the chat, and I'll try to give them a voice as well. Yeah, Thomas mentions neat. Thanks for the demo, and I agree. This is kind of cool. So I could see this as being helpful for even something as basic as like a patron comment. You know, like we've got paper comment cards here and there. You could have a little kiosk set up that would allow people to, you know, type out text and put in certain comments on how we could improve, or, you know, give kudos to that one or two people who may have given you good service or whatever, or even just like a self-check kiosk, or like enter an ISBN and get some info about it. Yeah, really neat.
Yes, I was impressed. You had the guts to do it live. Good job. You corrected your mistakes when they happened. Good job. You basically used Flask to implement everything, which is increasingly like the tool to do a lot of it. It's a very good tool for creating web interfaces. I think the thing that might have gotten lost is that the tool comes with many supporting tools, and one of the biggest ones is that templating engine. You kind of sort of have to learn how to use that templating engine. Otherwise, you can you could sit there and write all your HTML by hand, but the for loops and all that other sort of good stuff come along for free with the templating engine. So that's something that you have to learn. And also you have to add those decorators. Boy, those threw me for a loop when I first learned how to do. I still don't know what decorators are, but those you had to train around.
Wait till you see the decorators when you start documenting these APIs. You have a decorator for every single parameter you take, and a decorator for the output.
Those decorators, they threw me for a loop. No puns intended. But you did a very good job. Thank you very much.
John has a question in the chat, and he's presented on some PySimple GUI stuff before, but if you want to take a look for that one, just to give it a voice.
So
go ahead.
So cross-platform, easy cross-platform support is, the question is one of the advantages here making an application easier to develop cross operating system? That's definitely a very solid point. These apps can run on anything that can run Python. Already has a web browser pretty much, except for some MicroPython devices. But anything that can run Flask already has a web browser, which means you have that full user interface built in. If you can run the Python, you can get the full GUI and you can largely display it consistently. But the really big advantage of doing it this way is something I didn't talk about, which is the avenues for progress from here. So the obvious next step for me when I'd write something like this and I want to share it is asking, all right, how can I host this so that people don't even need to install it? You can take just a simple Flask app, and you'll want to build it to not use like the file system like this one did, to use a database. You can take a simple Flask app and you can plug it into most modern web server softwares through the web server gateway interface, they call it. You can plug it right in, and it'll just become a website on the internet that you can control access to that way. Obviously, for that, you'll want to handle some authentication and security, which there are tools for. But that's the big advantage of doing things this way, is it gives you that pathway. And also that you can leverage the truly impressive range of tools out there for front ends, which is, we saw just HTML, but you can style this with CSS, which is, there are billions of resources on the internet to teach you how to get a web page looking just how you want it in CSS. So it's very well featured for that. And then moving forward, you can even just sort of start separating your concerns, move away from that REST model of sending a web page into having a separate front end that just calls back with JSON back and forth, say, and you can take this as a stepping stone towards building a more modern web app, but just get what you need to know done at the start. Does that make sense? Yeah. This is how the RPC type model is how the vast majority of programs using Python with user interfaces work in this modern world. Is they have a server somewhere running the Python, and then they just make calls from a JavaScript API. Even desktop applications that use Python will often have secretly a little browser that's running, that the user interface is running in through systems like Electron.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. Couple more kudos in the chat.
Thank you.
Thomas also mentions, and I think this might be in reference to updating both the template and the Python. But I'm also not using Copilot yet. But I could see how this could be both extremely useful and very annoyed at the suggestions for
I
Copilot.
I'm a deep AI skeptic, but I have really warmed to Copilot, and it trips me up. It tripped me up today a little bit, but it is really helpful for a lot of really rote things, and writing out these templates can be a really rote thing.
And then Brooks is
Oh,
also.
I use a text editor.
I'm a little bit with you. Until 4 years ago, I was an Emacs devotee, and I miss it terribly. But this is where the world is. This is what everyone uses in EBSCO that I know for sure. For sure. Oof.
And then Brooks was
It's
also mentioning functions that return functions with a smiley at the very end there. He was also saying that the original syntax makes them make a lot more sense.
I
but
was
it's
referring to decorators.
Decorators. Okay, gotcha.
Decorators are a syntax for just writing a function around a function, that make it look a little bit less crazy nested, even though it's secretly that crazy nested.
There was also a cool function that Flask did that you simply said return such and such and so and so. And when you did return that, I believe it was a JSON stream, and the Flask tool created a little tiny web interface that had like a table or see it raw or collapsed the things. That was a cool feature.
That's actually a browser feature for when it
Oh, that's
receives
a
back
browser feature.
It's a feature in Firefox when it receives back content type JSON.
Oh,
It has
really?
that whole interactive. Yeah,
Oh.
anything that returns content type JSON has
Okay.
that whole interactive.
Oh, all right. All right. No, that's interesting.
It's really nice. Yeah, one thing I didn't get into is for developing these HTML pages, and especially for styling them, modern browsers are lush with tools built in automatically and countless plugins for.
I'm a little bit hesitant to rely on those things, though, because then this browser does this and that browser does that, and then you're going to assume that the person has this browser or that browser or this functionality. That would lead me from not depending on those cool functions.
Well, one of the things that's nice about modern CSS and especially modern HTML is it's extremely stable.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're just working in CSS and HTML as we were today, you're not gonna trip up on much. Unless you do animations. Don't try CSS animations and expect them to work well. But not animation related things, you're gonna get very consistent results. It's when you get into some of the stranger scripting stuff that starts tripping you up with those compatibility issues.
Well, what I meant is if you return a content of JSON, and then you're going to, and if you rely on the browser to render it, then you are assuming that the person has that kind of browser. That's different than highly conformant HTML.
Yeah.
And so those kind of cool hacks they're cool and interesting. Like, for example, in many browsers nowadays, if I pass them a well-formed XML file, it might display the XML file, but if it's also has an associated style sheet with it, it will read the style sheet and render the XML. That's a cool function, but you have to have a modern browser that knows how to do that.
And sometimes you might just want to see the XML raw.
Right, you might sometimes want
one of the REST principles I didn't discuss is a sort of format agnostic endpoints. This is one of the more esoteric REST principles. The argument being that the requester should say whether they want to receive it back as a formatted thing or as a XML or as an, and that the REST framework should respect that format request and deliver it in the way that the device requesting it needs. That's one of the weirder REST principles. There are a lot of people who describe sort of any sort of simple state RPC API as RESTful, but there are people who mean much more specific things by REST. So it's a bit of a complicated, a bit of a loaded term.
That was very interesting, and I'm going to say goodbye now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks again, Quentin, as well. I'll just do one last call for any other questions. Cool. Seeing none. Well, thanks so much again. One more just kind of, let's see, where's my hand clapping reaction? But yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned a thing or two here. So I will stop recording.